Hey plant peeps, what's up? Welcome back to herebutnot. Today I'm going to talk to you about Phragmipediums, and I'm super excited about it because Phragmipediums are probably one of my most favorite orchids next to Phalaenopsis. If you're new here, I'm Dustin. I run a blog called herebutnot, which I talk about orchid care, things like flasking, growing orchids, as well as other plants and things like that. So subscribe if you haven't already, and otherwise let's get to the Phragmipedium talk. These are my Phragmipediums. A bunch of them are Cavacii hybrids. 3 or 4 of them are. And this one in the front is a Cavacii species. I've started flasking my own, which if you followed along in previous videos, you're aware of those already. And if not, I encourage you to check them out. And then I have another plant that's just finishing its bloom cycle, which I'll be cutting off shortly. I should probably rattle off the names just so that you know which ones are which. The one on the left is Phragmipedium Samuel Crothers, which is a hybrid between Phragmipedium fischerii and Cavacii. The one in the front here is Phragmipedium Cavacii. This is Phragmipedium closterianum, which is a miniature kind of medium petal length Phrag. This Phragmipedium is Phrag Andine Tears, I believe. It's Warzowickianum by Cavacii as well. This is Phrag Fritz Schomburg, which is besseae by Cavacii. As you can tell, I like the Cavacii hybrids because they have gigantic flowers and they do have quite a bit of vigor and they grow well in my conditions. This plant on the right is Phragmipedium Pink Panther, which is fischerii by Schlimnii. The two in the front are Mexipedium, which is not technically Phrags, but very closely related, and they come from Central America, fairly close to where Phragmipediums are from. The Phragmipedium in the back is Rothianum, which is a natural hybrid between Longifolium and herebutnot. And then the two flasks in the front are flasks that I made, which is Phragmipedium Hane Papau by Sam Crothers and Phragmipedium Pink Panther by Hane Papau. I just realized that I forgot one of my Phrags, which is the Phragmipedium Hane Papau, so I'm going to grab that to throw that in here as well. This is Phragmipedium Hane Papau, which is a hybrid between Phrag besseae and Phrag Schlimnii. I know this plant looks really ratty. It's kind of embarrassing, I'm not going to lie. I have not done a very good job with this Phragmipedium, and that's partially because it has a trait that's inherited from besseae, where each new growth climbs up and away from the previous growth. So you don't get nice compact plants like a bunch of my other Phragmipediums. You get a Phrag that tries to crawl or climb, because in nature, Phragmipedium besseae climbs up a mountain. And so it's an adaptive trait that helps them essentially like grow and do better because they're in a vertical growth and clumping together is not as valuable for them. The problem is when you're growing them indoors in a pot, this trait is awful. It creates a repotting issue. Trying to get this thing to fit into a pot is not easy, and it means that you need to repot sometimes once or twice a year, depending on how fast the plant is growing. And what's happened is I have put it in my front window where the leaves can kind of just hang and do what they want, but it's not growing new roots because the new roots are aborting because it's too dry in my climate. Plus the light is really bright in that south window. So it looks a little ratty, it's alive. I also took 2 cuttings from it in the beginning of spring, and that's what sent out a bunch of new growths. So don't shame me because of the look of this plant. So the reason I like Phrags a lot is because they grow so well. They're a fast-growing orchid compared to other slipper orchids. So if you've tried growing Paphiopedilum, Phragmipedium will put out a new growth and it will mature in a single season and bloom in a single season, where I found Paphiopedilums can be much slower, especially from smaller sized plants. You can get a Paph that will bloom every 2 or 3 years. Phrags will typically bloom every year. If you grow in a greenhouse, I recommend you check out Ed's Orchids. You probably already know about him, but he's got a bunch of Phrags that he grows outdoors in a greenhouse in the UK, and they look really amazing, and he's got lots of good advice. I think that the information that I'm offering is probably more honed into people growing indoors, possibly to similar conditions as my own. General overview, Phragmipediums come from South America in along the Andes Mountains up around the northwest tip or section. You have it broken into a few different subgenre, but you have the micropedilums, so things like fischerii, Schlimnii, besseae, the ones that are small, compact, and have fairly pink or red, like brighter colors. Then you have Laurifolia, and they have mid-length petals that are more in line with these. And then you have the Phragmipedium, subgenus Phragmipedium, which is the long-petaled ones, as well as some of the outliers. And then you also have Phragmipedium cavachii that I think sits in its own right now. It may have been bundled in with Micropetalum. I don't really know because the taxonomic groupings keep changing, and so sometimes you'll read one and it's placed in one place, and another time you'll read it in another. It looks similar, just a bigger flower. What I specifically like about Phragmipediums is they all come from the same area. So growing them in South America means that their care requirements fit well with other plants I like to grow. So I have the Aroids that I've been getting into, and Aroids all come from South America as well. And so I can kind of double up on care requirements when I'm able to grow big plants like these Philodendron melanocrysum and the Anthurium crystallinum. So for me, that's a pro because it means that if I do well with one type of plant, it means that I can generally extrapolate that to other plants in the area. So Phragmipediums grow well for me. It also means most likely that Aroids in the same region and area will also grow well for me. And looking at their specific elevation and habitats that they grow from, I can find specific plants that will do better in my climate and under my conditions. And to me, that's awesome. Plus I get like a mini ecosystem or jungle that's like from one section, and that's awesome. So I talked briefly about how Phragmipediums grow in nature in South America. I want to kind of explore that a little bit more because it's really helpful to understand how Phragmipediums grow because their care requirements are not the same as other orchids. Typically with other orchids, you want their roots to be wet and then dry out, and then you want to follow a cycle, a wet-dry cycle that fits with the orchid's like natural conditions. Phragmipediums, because they're terrestrial, they have long roots, and the top layer of where they naturally grow will be covered in moss or mud, and then the deeper layers are going to be mineral rich, have lots of erosion and like rock particulate that increases the natural occurrence of calcium and magnesium. And I think that a lot of people have, based on all of the care sheets you read online, it says they need pure water. But if you think about how erosion works, you have rain that interacts with carbon dioxide, which makes carbonic acid, and carbonic acid in your rainwater runs down the mountain, running through all of the rocks. It pulls out a lot of minerals and calcium. That's specifically why my local water is high in calcium carbonate, because it comes from the mountains and it runs through a bunch of lime and rock that is high in calcium. And then when we get it in the city, it has high calcium carbonate content. And I think that's also why my Phragmipediums do fairly well. I would bet that my plants would do better if my humidity was higher, because my humidity is frequently like 30 or even down to 18% sometimes. However, if you can provide enough nutrients and light, humidity is a lot more negligible, clearly. If I can grow plants at a humidity of 18 to 20% on some days, that says a lot more about the resilience of tropical plants in general, right? This is a Phragmipedium, the Fritz Schomburg, that I repotted in spring. And you can see the roots have filled the pot already. Like, these things grow very fast. And if conditions are right, the roots reach down and pull in more nutrients, and they have to because they produce a lot of foliage in a single season. I think that a really good thing to do if you're like learning about Phragmipediums is to check out some of the videos from Ecuagenera. Ecuagenera is in South America. They grow Phragmipediums really well, and they supply, I would say, probably a bulk of the world's Phrags. I know that that's where I get pretty much all of mine. But they go on tours where they show people, like on YouTube, they have a couple videos where they show people specifically where Phragmipediums grow and the conditions that they're in. And I think it's super important to like just take a look at that and see how the conditions are not what we may expect necessarily. And I don't think that when you're growing in a home or in your condo that you need to replicate a natural environment, but being aware of certain adaptive pressures is important. So understanding that Phragmipediums grow in a place where there's constant root trickle and that the roots never dry out means that they haven't ever had to adapt to conditions where the roots are drier, Whereas Phalaenopsis, for example, they grow on a tree and there's seasonal drying, and so the roots have had to adapt to conditions where they specifically can survive when it is drier. Phragmipediums aren't like that. And what happens if you let the Phragmipedium's roots dry too much, they abort. So on my Phragmipedium hane papau, all of the new roots on these new growths have not been able to start actual roots because it's too dry. And what happens is they start to project out, and then the root dries off and it aborts. So if you're growing Phragmipediums in semi-hydro where you're potentially not addressing the lack of moisture in your climate at the top of the pot, that might be why you've had bad success with them in the past. The biggest thing for me, and I know that this plant looks terrible, has been to provide moisture on the base of the plant. And I can pretty much guarantee you that if I were to take this plant and repot it, it would do very well. It would recover. You can see these areas that have grown in areas where moisture was captured have done well, but anywhere else the roots have not actually grown. So Phrag roots need constant moisture. They also need really good airflow. And I find the best way to do that is to add pumice and perlite to my orchid media at a mix rate of about 50%. You can use leca and other things like that are inert, that allow for water to pass through the media very well, but I still think you need some amount of organics in order to hold water and pull the water up to the base of the plant. If you're using inorganic material alone, it tends to only evaporate to a certain height within the water. I know a lot of people have really great success growing in sphagnum moss alone, as well as rock wool, which is like a synthetic material that they use in hydroponics. I don't like sphagnum moss alone because sphagnum moss breaks down and it starts to compact. And then when sphagnum moss compacts, you have that airflow problem. So for me, a blend of inert and inorganic materials, organic and inorganic materials is super helpful for long-term root health. If you were to do sphagnum moss alone, just make sure that you repot a lot. And also make sure that if you're using sphagnum moss that you're adding calcium, because sphagnum moss acidifies your water. And if your water is already pretty acidic and you're not adding calcium, then you're not providing what those plants need in nature. People will add oyster shells, which in an acidic environment will release calcium, and they also buffer the pH and bring the pH up, which for some of the micropetalum species and Phragmipedium cavachii, a pH of around 7.9 is more ideal. I do pH adjust my tap water. Tap water is 7.9 to 8, but I pH adjust it for everything else. I pH adjust it for the Phragmipediums as well. All of that does is takes any calcium minerals that are in my water and makes sure that they're available to the plant. So what about light? Light is a vital component to growing any plants, all plants, and Phragmipedium specifically, a lot of people have a hard time getting them to rebloom. So typically light is the main problem that people encounter when they're not able to get a Phragmipedium to bloom, because you have two components of light that cause problem. One, you need to get them bright enough to essentially fuel and feed flowers, but then you also need the light not to be hot, because Phragmipediums, the bulk of them come from highland areas where your average temperatures range from about 18 degrees Celsius up to about 27 degrees Celsius. And in the winter, some of them get down even closer to like 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, like Phragmipedium cavachii and I think besseae and a few of those other ones. So when you're trying to increase light, it's really a balance between trying to find or create enough light but not a bunch of heat that you're going to burn the plants. When temperatures go above, I'd say about 28 degrees Celsius, you start to run into problems with some of the more finicky species like Phragmipedium besseae and Phragmipedium cavachii. So if you've struggled in the past to grow them and you live in a hot climate, that might be part of the reason. The other thing is as temperatures go up, the plants transpire more, they release more water through their leaves in order to cool themselves down. And if you've been keeping the potting media too dry, if you've been growing them more like a Paphiopedilum, then that results in essentially a plant that's not doing well because it's not getting the proper flow and able to cool itself down. So it's kind of a balance between both parts. I grow in a cooler climate, so I can't really talk necessarily about the restrictions of growing in a warm climate. But based on my readings where Phragmipediums come from in nature, their higher elevation on the mountain and the effects that has on temperature, that can be a restriction but it's like a multiple part thing. If we're talking specifics for light, you probably want intermediate levels, not quite as much for Cattleya, but just below that, provided you can keep their leaves cool. So an east-facing window and or LED lights. I grow mine both under LED lights and an east-facing window. The LED lights come on in the afternoon once the sun goes over the roof. And for the most part, my plants grow fairly well. I would say that the darkness of some of these leaves could probably mean that they may do better with a bit more light. If I can't get the Phragmipedium cavachii hybrids to bloom this year, I'm gonna put another light on that bottom section. So I talked about how my water conditions are potentially more ideal for Phragmipediums. I know that if you read online, a lot of the things say that Phrags need pure water. And in situations where they don't have pure water, you get leaf tip burn. So I'm going to talk about two elements of that. A theory that I have on why leaf tip burn happens. And the second part is a way that you can mitigate or kind of deal with somewhat higher level dissolved minerals and salts in your water, which involves flushing. I talked about how my water quality is probably less than ideal. It's 250 parts per milliliter. Right out of the tap, when I add the fertilizer, it probably gets up to about 600 to 750 parts per milliliter, which I'm sure surprises many of you, because if you read about Phragmipedium care, they're supposed to have it's like 50 parts per millimeter or something like that, which clearly is not the case, and my plants don't look too bad for the most part, right? That comes because every single week when I water, I take them to the sink and I flush a full pot of water through the media. So I pull out all of the old junk. I literally run like tons and tons of water through the pot to pull out any old salts, any deposits or volatile compounds from the plant, and really to oxygenate and turn over everything in the pot, because it's pretty stagnant there, right? Like if you think about something you bury under the ground, it starts to rot and get gross. So to me, my weekly flush is like a way of getting rid of the junk in the pot. And I think it's super important, even if you don't have water quality like me, to do that, because if you don't and you're fertilizing every week, the fertilizer is going to build up in your media, and you potentially, after the course of a month, could be running at a parts per milliliter at over over 1,000 potentially, depending on how much you fertilize. So keep that in mind. I had asked in my last video if any of you had questions about Phragmipediums, and Blue Aquatics asked a couple questions that I think are super common and important questions to address. One of them involves leaf tip burn. So a lot of people get leaf tip burn in Phragmipediums, and they attribute that to high salt content. I've been running an experiment this year and being more or less careful about how I water and paying attention to what happens when I do get leaf tip burn. And in this, it may be two different things, and I'm just talking about how my current situation is. But when you look at a bunch of my leaves, they don't all have leaf tip burn. In fact, most of them don't. And the reason is, at first I didn't know why. And then this year I tried something, which was, normally I fertilize my plants from the top. You've seen maybe in my last video about how I water my orchids, that I run fertilizer all over my plants, and I let it rain down in the crown, in everything. And I think what happens is, in situations where I'm fertilizing with a lot of fertilizer, the fertilizer salts, when the water evaporates out of the crown, leave behind a precipitate that damages the cuticle of the plant. And so in that sense, the high dissolved salts can cause leaf burn, but it's not in the same sense that the roots are taking up and distributing the minerals to the tips that causes burn, which can be more common in other plants. A lot of tropicals are like that. If you give them too high of minerals, the tips of the leaves burn because that's where the minerals concentrate. That might be the case for sodium, but my point is, if you're fertilizing and you're watering from the top, just make sure that when you're done, before you put them back by the shelf, to flush the crown out, or just avoid getting the crown wet at all. To me, leaf tip burn doesn't really bother me. I know that it kind of shows a sign of imperfection. That's generally what I found the cause to be, given that most of my plants don't have it, and in specific situations it's showing up. The bulk of the other old leaves that have leaf tip burn, a lot of the times it's because the leaves grow long and they touch the window, and the window gets hot and the leaf burns. On this longer longifolium hybrid, that's what these are from. The leaves were they expand and reach out, touch my window, and the window gets hot, and they get singed off. Blue Aquatics also asked about new plants that are flimsy or droopy immediately after acquisition and repotting. And the biggest thing I think there is when I repot a Phragmipedium, specifically of the micropetalum-like genus, besseae, fisherii, schlimnii, cavacii, any of those water-loving types, I let them sit in about a 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch of water immediately after repotting. And I typically will do that for probably the first 6 months, unless it's the dead of winter and it's really cold, because when it's like -30 out, I get a convection current on my window that brings cool air down over the plants, and the temperature near my window can be down around like 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. And when they're that cold, they're not pulling or transpiring as much, so I don't want their roots sitting in cold, wet water, because that's like an invitation for fungal infection. I've never had that problem, but it's just something that I've learned with caring for orchids in general is like, when the temperatures are cool, don't let them be as wet. On newly planted pots, or on transplanted Phragmipediums, you want to make sure that the roots stay moist at that beginning point. Because if you can keep the roots moist initially, they'll start growing faster and establish more effectively just at the start. This is the Phragmipedium cavacii. You can see that it's sitting in about 1 inch of water, and this is a new acquisition, I think about a month ago now, maybe a month and a half, and it's doing fairly well. I am expecting that roots will start to show up on the side of the pot probably within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And once I see roots kind of poking out the side of the pot like this, then I know that I'm out of the woods and things are like in good order. And that's the case with all my plants. When I transplant a plant, I give it more attention initially. I make sure that I'm on top of watering. Sometimes I'll water twice a week if the roots are drying out, because new orchid media tends to not hold water as well and takes longer to get waterlogged. And then once the plant is established, once I see roots, once I see new leaves, then I kind of back off and put it onto my regular routine. All right, so the one thing I haven't talked about yet is fertilizer. I talked about how fast Phragmipediums grow, and a fast-growing plant needs lots of fertilizer. Now, everything else that everyone says is that Phrags don't like a lot of minerals and nutrients, or like high ppms at their roots, right? So how do you get a plant that produces an entire growth or multiple growths in a single season, but then can't deal with dissolved minerals around the roots or dissolved salts around the roots? To me, that's where the conflict of information kind of started with Phragmipediums, because I was like, well, they do really well for me. My water is crap by layman's terms. And then on top of that, I have a secret weapon, which is I use organic fertilizer. And Ed even talked about this once. Ed's Orchids talked about this once in one of his videos. And I was like, yeah, because I absolutely love organic fertilizers. When I was doing research into regular regular plant care, something that I came across a lot was rock dust. And rock dust is pulverized mountain rock that in some gardening communities and realms, they use that in like to grow like gigantic vegetables and stuff, because it has all of your like micronutrients. And typically you need bacteria to help break and release those minerals down, and or you need to acidify, which helps change that interaction. But I use a product called Gaia Green. This is not endorsed or anything by them. I love it. It's kind of a secret weapon because it has rock dust, it's got bone meal, it's got kelp, it's got like a whole bunch of organic material that when they break down, they release minerals and nutrients over a longer period of time, including nitrogen. So to me, that's important, right? Plants grow, these are terrestrials, they grow in the forest, there's like stuff that's decaying and constantly breaking down, plus they're in the mountains and their roots are reaching into like rocks and minerals and pulling all that stuff in. So like when we talk about trying to emulate as much as we can those things in nature, that's why I like using the organic fertilizer. For you, at a bare minimum, I would say blood meal. Blood meal is a nitrogen based organic fertilizer. Don't use very much, like 1/8 of a teaspoon per pot or less even is plenty. Blood meal, bone meal, there's like a bunch of things like that. I would try and find more of a blend that allows for like multiple parts NPK as well as the other micronutrients like rock dust, or I think there's another word for it. It's like green something or other, green fault, I don't know. So if you're using the organic fertilizers, one caveat, just don't use a lot, because if you dump like a whole bunch in there because you're like, oh, I'm gonna really feed them, I'm gonna feed them so much, it can cause rot and problems like that because it requires bacteria to break it down. So it's like a little goes a long way. I had played with different amounts and found that about an eighth of a teaspoon when I repot is very helpful. And then in the spring, I'll put probably about an eighth of a teaspoon on top. I'll water first, put an eighth of a teaspoon on them, and then sprinkle a little bit of stuff in there and then water it into the pot. All right, so I talked about Phragmipedium care, and I specifically addressed the bulk of the plants that I grow, which tend to be the micropetalum or micropetalum hybrids, which means those are the ones that like alkaline conditions and wet roots. There are a couple outliers that you need to be aware of that maybe don't fall into that same category, which are the long-petaled Phragmipediums. So Phragmipedium caudatum and Phragmipedium wallisii or Warrswickianum. I don't know what the classification of Warrswickianum and wallisii is. I believe they are now classified as one species. I just don't know which, is it Warrswickii or wallisii? Or Warrswickianum or wallisii. Anyways, orchid names are the worst. Like I said in previous videos, it's very annoying. But getting back to the long-petaled ones like those, you should be aware that the long-petaled Phrags grow in warmer conditions and they grow in conditions that are not consistently wet. So as with all orchids, look up the individual species that you are trying to grow, and if you're growing a hybrid, look at the parents of that species or of that hybrid and tailor the needs to that specific plant. Phragmipedium wallisii grows in a more exposed area. It gets brighter light. It gets much cooler light. It's super high on the mountain. I think it's up like 2,000 meters, which means at night it probably is getting closer to 5 degrees Celsius. It also apparently has like a higher tolerance for warm temperatures. So look into the individual species because it may have individual care requirements. And for those long-petaled species, not the intermediate ones, like the long-petaled ones that have like petals that are like a foot long, grow those more like Paphiapetalums. And the intermediate ones love water. So things like pearcei, Clutrianum, longifolium, blah, blah, blah. Those are like really, they often grow along streams where they are sometimes fully submerged in water. So those will like water, but again, flush lots of water through the pots. And then be aware that there are a few outliers. I think Lindenianum, Lindenia, I don't know how to say it, specifically does not like high minerals, and it grows on the northeast corner of South America, and it needs much lower dissolved minerals and more acidic conditions than all of the other Phrags. So you need to just be aware that every species is different. I've given you general insights on the plants that I grow within about half the species. All right, so it's time for me to get out of here and get back to watering. It's like a holiday Monday and I have so much watering to do. But before I go, Clyde wants to say hi.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Hey, snoozing. Say hi. Say hi.